Learning how to solve cross on bottom is a little bit difficult for some beginners to adjust to, but it is really worth it. And here's a demonstration. I have two solves side by side. The one on the right is cross on top. The one on the left is cross on bottom. Look at the differences between those times. One of the first things you should learn, and you should probably already know, is how to do D flicks and D2 flicks. Now, knowing how to do D flicks is going to be really helpful because you're going to need to move the cross around. And without rotating, you could just do D flicks. This is similar to how instead of rotating when you solved the cross on the top, you just did U and U flicks. Now, many beginners struggle with finding all their pieces on the bottom. So I would recommend using more than 15 seconds of inspection time, so that way you know where all your pieces are, and then you could solve them in the most efficient way you can. One thing that I would recommend is going on CS Timer and making a new session, and then once you make your new session, you go to the top and where it says WCA, switch it to 3x3, and once you have that, switch it from random state to easy cross. You can then train your bottom cross solving, and it'll give you scrambles with easier crosses, so that way you won't have to struggle with finding your pieces. Once you feel ready, you could go to normal scrambles. So let's look at this example scramble. That's easy. The scramble is up on the screen, and if you don't know how to read move notation, there's some links in the description. So basically, we could see here that this edge is solved. These two are one move away from being solved, and this one's the only one that isn't one move away from being solved. So the way we would solve this one, if it's in this slice layer right here, and white is facing down or facing towards you, in this case would be to hold it in the back, and then we do a D2 to be exact, and then we do an L followed by a D2 and see how it's now solved it. And now because we did that, we can now just do L prime, and for here, this is a little too advanced, but you can see we can preserve this pair. So we could just do F2. But if you do run in that case where you see here that you have a little block right here, and you do want to preserve it, is to do R prime followed by F2 and then R. And this should preserve it. Now here's another example with a more regular looking scramble. So we could see that this one is D prime away from being solved. This one and this one are in the bottom layer, and this one, although not in the correct spot, is just an R prime away from being solved. So if we make it go into the right spot, it's just an F2 away from being solved. So now by looking at this one being an L prime away from being solved, we can use this to our advantage, since this one is an F2 away from being solved and this one is an L prime from being solved to the correct center. We can do an L F2 and then solve these two, solving this one first, because if we solve this one first, then it would be breaking this one away. But before we do that, we must bring this one to its correct center. So we can do D, L, F. And to get this one to the correct spot, we can do D prime, R prime, or R. No, it is R prime. And then D. One case that you may run into is that these two need to swap with each other. If you haven't solved the whole cross, It really depends on which angle you're from, but most of them will follow this rule. You're gonna want to do an R followed by a D2 and then an R prime and then either a D, D prime, or D2 to put them back so that way they're solved. However, you shouldn't really fully align your cross until after you're done with it and you're ready to go on to the first layer or F2L. If you run into the case where both of these are needing to swap, but you did solve the other half of the cross, then you're gonna want to hold them on your right and then do this algorithm: R, D, R prime, D prime, R prime, and then that should fix it. But what if they're across from each other and they need to swap? Now, if the cross wasn't solved, you could just D2 them to make them solved. But in this case, you didn't do that, and you just realized what you could do is this alg: M2, U2, M2. And then it's just the cross is solved again. So I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and if you need any more help, leave it in the comments and I'll do my best to help you. If you want more tutorials from this channel, comment down below which tutorials you would like to see. I don't know really that much when it comes to cubing knowledge, but I can help beginners the best that I can. But that was it for this video. Thank you all for watching. Comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see y'all later. Bye!